He left a note saying he found someone better, he had no idea. My grandmother had already prepared for this moment. The note was written in blue ink, his handwriting still as neat and deliberate as the day I first fell in love with it. I found someone better. I'm taking half of everything, including your grandmother's inheritance. Don't bother calling. I've already moved in with Jessica. The lawyers will contact you about the divorce proceedings. I read it 3 times. The first time, my brain rejected it entirely. The words just floated there. Disconnected syllables in someone else's handwriting on someone else's kitchen counter in someone else's life. The second time, the tremble started in my fingers. The third time, I set the note down very carefully, the way you set down a glass you're afraid you might shatter. And I stood in the middle of my kitchen in Charlotte, North Carolina at 7:52 in the morning, and I did not cry. I smiled. Not because I wasn't hurt. I was devastated in the kind of deep, cellular way that doesn't show up in tears right away. I smiled because somewhere in the back of my mind, below the grief and the shock, and the sudden nauseating realization that the man who used to bring me coffee every Sunday morning had just declared war on me, somewhere beneath all of that, I heard my grandmother's voice. Remember, my dear granddaughter, that the best answer to someone who underestimates you is to exceed every expectation they ever had. Trevor had left me a note. He had no idea I had been left something far more powerful. My name is Martha Thompson. I'm 37 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I had spent 12 years building Bright Hollow Labs into one of the most respected pharmaceutical research companies in the Carolinas. We employed 63 people. We held patents on 2 compounds currently in phase 3 clinical trials. I drove a sensible Volvo, wore sensible shoes, and had spent 8 years in what I believed was a sensible, loving, honest marriage. Trevor Thompson was 41, financial advisor at Thornmere Logistics, a mid-sized investment firm in uptown Charlotte. Handsome in a careful, curated way, the kind of man who knew exactly how a Windsor knot should sit, who remembered the names of waitresses at restaurants we visited twice a year, who gave toasts at dinner parties that made other wives lean over and whisper, "You're so lucky." I believed them. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was assuming that because I had built something from nothing, because I had been transparent with Trevor about my income and my finances and my dreams, he must have been equally transparent with me. My third mistake, and this one I forgive myself for, because it came from love, was trusting completely in a person I had never actually tested. Trevor was tested eventually. He just didn't know it was a test. I walked through the house that morning the way investigators walk through crime scenes, slowly, methodically, cataloging absence. His closet, empty, hangers pushed to one side like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The safe in his home office, wide open, cleared out. He'd taken his passport, our bond documents, and the physical copies of our joint account statements going back 3 years. I noticed he'd been careful to take only his things, or what he'd decided were his things, and leave the rest looking untouched, the work of someone who had rehearsed this moment many, many times. Our bedroom, the antique jewelry box that had sat on my grandmother's dresser for 40 years, was gone from mine. Carved mahogany, brass hinges, a small painted bluebird on the lid, worth maybe $800 at auction, worth everything to me. He had taken that on purpose, to make sure I knew he was serious. The joint checking account I checked on my phone, $214.37 remaining. 3 days ago, it had held $47,000. The joint savings, gone. $89,000 cleared. The credit card statement that auto-populated in my email at 8:15 a.m., $14,880 in charges over the past 3 months on an account I hadn't known existed, opened in both our names. A weekend at the Ballantine Hotel, dinners at Kindred, a bracelet from a jeweler in South Hart. Charges that mapped, I realized with growing cold clarity. A love affair conducted 18 inches from my marriage. I should have collapsed. I had watched enough movies to know that was the expected response. Crumpling to the floor, sobbing into the hardwood, calling my best friend to come hold me while I ugly cried through a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc. Instead, I walked to my home office. In the corner, behind my desk, sat a personal safe I had purchased in 2019 with my own money, installed by a locksmith Trevor had never met and never once mentioned to my husband. Not from secrecy, just from the quiet, private instinct that some things belonged only to me. Trevor had walked past that safe hundreds of times. He had assumed it held business documents. He was not wrong. He was just catastrophically incomplete. I need to tell you about Eleanor. My grandmother was born in 1935 in Concord, North Carolina, the third daughter of a tobacco farmer who believed women were decorative and men were structural. She proved him wrong so thoroughly and so quietly that he never quite understood what had happened until she was already gone. Eleanor had studied chemistry at UNC Chapel Hill in 1953, one of 11 women in a department of 300, and graduated in the top 4 of her class. She got a job at a pharmaceutical firm in Raleigh that paid her 60% of what her male colleagues earned and told her she should be grateful for the opportunity. She was grateful for exactly 4 years. Then she founded Velmark Automation in 1961, in a rented space above a dry cleaners on South Elm Street in Greensboro, with $14,000 she'd saved by eating sandwiches at her desk for 4 years. By 1975, Velmark employed over 200 people and held contracts with 3 major hospital systems in the Southeast. By 1985, she had expanded into laboratory automation technology and was licensing her systems to research universities from Georgia to Virginia. She retired, or appeared to retire in 2003. The family gathered for her 80th birthday and toasted her legacy with champagne. Trevor had raised his glass and told her story beautifully, the way he told every story beautifully, smooth and charming, and just emotional enough to seem sincere. My grandmother had watched him from across the table with eyes that missed nothing, and when he finished, she smiled at him with the exact warmth of a woman who had spent 60 years learning to read people accurately. "What a lovely toast," she'd said. She never said another kind word about him again, not to his face, not until her letter. 6 months before she died, she called me out to her garden. The crepe myrtles were blooming pink and white, and the late afternoon light made everything look like a photograph of something you'd want to remember. She pressed a sealed envelope into my hands, heavy cream stationery, sealed with deep red wax and the impression of her signet ring, and told me to put it somewhere safe. "Not in a shared space," she said, watching my face carefully. "Somewhere that belongs only to you." "What is it?" I'd ask. "Insurance," she said, "against the worst version of a situation I hope you never face." She died 11 months later, in her sleep, in her own bed, at age 87. I held her hand in the last hour and thought about that envelope for the first time since I'd locked it in my personal safe. Not yet, something told me. Not yet. I waited 3 years. The dial on my personal safe has a satisfying mechanical click at each number. I know that click better than I know the sound of Trevor's laugh anymore. I turned it now, 14, right, 33, left, 7, right, and felt the door swing open. The envelope sat exactly where I'd placed it. I lifted it with both hands. The wax seal was unbroken. Inside, 3 documents. The first was a letter, 12 pages, front and back, in my grandmother's handwriting. Still elegant, still precise, even in her final months when her hands had begun to tremble slightly. I recognized the slight leftward lean of her capital M's. The second was a legal document, a will, notarized, witnessed by 2 attorneys I didn't recognize. The third made my breath stop entirely. Stock certificates, Velmark Automation, 65% controlling interest. I sat down on the floor of my office because my legs forgot how to work. "My dearest Martha," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then circumstances have forced you to need the truth about our family's real inheritance. I have watched you build your company with the same determination and integrity that guided my own career. I have also watched your husband with growing concern. Trevor has always struck me as the kind of man who measures love in dollar signs, and I fear that someday his greed might overcome his affection for you." She explained in her careful and methodical way what she had done and why she had done it. The will read at her funeral had been a decoy. A legal document, yes, properly executed and enforceable, but deliberately constructed to conceal a much larger reality. She had divided a modest estate among her family, her house, some jewelry, approximately $200,000 in visible accounts. Trevor had walked out of that estate rubbing his hands together with plans for real estate investments and laboratory expansions. What he had not known, what no one in the family had known, was that Eleanor had never actually divested from Velmark Automation. The family had assumed she sold her controlling interest when she retired in 2003. She had not. She had restructured it through a series of holding companies and family trusts so legally complex that finding it would have required knowing to look for it. Velmark had continued growing for 20 years after her supposed retirement. The laboratory automation sector had exploded in the 2010s. Hospital systems were buying their systems by the dozen. The stock certificates in my hands represented a company now valued at over $23 million. My 65% stake, approximately $15 million. The trust fund she had established separately, accumulating interest since 2003, $8 million. Total, $23 million. Sitting in my kitchen, believing he'd walked away with $50,000 from our joint accounts and my grandmother's antique jewelry box, Trevor had abandoned a woman worth $23 million. He had left over a note about Jessica. I heard myself make a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob, something in between, something that had no name yet because I'd never felt exactly this thing before. The simultaneous weight of grief and the sudden electric clarity of knowing, beyond any doubt, that you are going to be completely fine. Patricia Williams has been my attorney since Bright Hollow Labs Incorporated in 2013. She is 52 years old, has a law degree from Duke, a master's in forensic accounting she completed at 44 while raising 3 kids, and a reputation in Charlotte legal circles that makes opposing counsel rearrange their calendars to avoid courtroom conflicts with her. She was at my kitchen table within 90 minutes of my call. I watched her read through the documents. She's not a woman who shows surprise easily. 30 years of law practice will calibrate your reactions until almost nothing moves the needle. But as she turned the pages of my grandmother's legal documents, I watched her eyebrows rise in slow, incremental degrees until they'd traveled almost to her hairline. "Martha," she said finally, setting the documents down with the careful reverence of someone handling evidence, "do you understand what you're holding? I'm beginning to. Your grandmother didn't just leave you money. She removed her reading glasses and looked at me directly. She built you a fortress. These trust instruments were designed specifically to be divorce-proof. North Carolina is equitable distribution. Marital property gets divided fairly in a divorce. But this inheritance was never marital property. It was established before your marriage, held in your name alone, and your husband never knew it existed. He cannot touch a single dollar of it. He thinks he already touched it," I said. "He touched the moat," Patricia said, "and he thinks he's inside the castle." We spent the next 4 hours at that kitchen table. Patricia reviewed 3 months of bank statements and identified the pattern immediately. Trevor had been systematically withdrawing amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. $2,000 here, $3,500 there, for approximately 14 weeks before his departure. Calculated, patient, deliberate. He had also opened the joint credit card in secret, run it to nearly $15,000 in what Patricia described dryly as documented evidence of an extramarital relationship, and arranged to have the billing statement sent to a P.O. box she found referenced in a document he'd left in the open safe. This isn't just infidelity, Patricia said. This is premeditated financial fraud. The pattern of behavior, the small withdrawals, the hidden credit card, the systematic removal of assets over months. This is someone who planned his exit very, very carefully. What do? We do everything. She pulled out a yellow legal pad. First, I file for divorce Monday morning and we freeze any remaining joint assets. Second, we report the missing funds to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department as theft, because that's what it is. Third, we document the jewelry box and every other personal item he removed. Fourth, and Martha, this is important, we do not contact Trevor. Not yet. We let him believe he succeeded. We let him celebrate. She looked at me steadily. The longer he thinks he won, the longer he doesn't realize he's standing in the middle of the evidence we're building against him. I thought about him, somewhere across Charlotte right now, probably drinking wine with Jessica and laughing about how easy it had been, probably checking his phone for my calls, probably a little disappointed I hadn't called yet because the fantasy requires a weeping woman at the other end to confirm it worked. Take your time, I said. The security footage was the piece I hadn't expected to find. My home security system, a Ring Pro I'd installed in 2021 after a neighborhood break-in 2 streets over, had been logging motion-activated footage to a cloud account Trevor didn't know existed. The router login, the cloud password, the account email address, all mine alone, because I'd installed it myself on a Saturday afternoon while Trevor was golfing, and it had simply never come up. I pulled up the archive 2 weeks before he left at 11:23 a.m. On a Tuesday when I was at Bright Hollow Labs presenting Q2 projections to our board, the front door opened. Trevor walked in first. Behind him, a woman I recognized from his firm's website, Jessica Carver, executive assistant, mid-30s, dark hair, sharp-featured, the kind of look that photographs well. They were inside my house for 2 hours and 47 minutes. The footage showed them going through my home office first. I watched Trevor open my file cabinet, flip through folders, take photographs with his phone. I watched Jessica sit at my desk and type something on Trevor's laptop she'd carried in. I watched them go through our bedroom, Trevor pointing at things, Jessica taking notes in a small spiral notepad. They left together at 2:10 p.m. Jessica was carrying the mahogany jewelry box under her arm. My hands were shaking when I called Patricia. They were in my house, I said, 14 days before he left. He brought her in, and they went through my office together. A brief silence. Then, send me that footage, right now. Don't delete anything. Don't adjust the timestamps. Send it exactly as it exists. What does this change? It changes everything, Patricia said. Unauthorized entry. Even if he had a key, he does not have the right to bring another individual into your home without consent and allow her to go through your private documents. Depending on what she accessed, we may be looking at conspiracy charges. But Martha, the footage of her taking the jewelry box, that's not just a bitter divorce detail. That's theft on camera. The call from Robert Williams came on a Thursday morning, 8 days after I'd found the note. Robert Williams, senior partner at Thornmere Logistics, 22 years in investment management, former president of the North Carolina Securities Dealers Association. He sounded, when I picked up, like a man who had not slept in 2 days. Martha, I'm calling because you need to know immediately. He cleared his throat. We discovered yesterday that Trevor has been making unauthorized transfers from client accounts. We've identified approximately $200,000 so far, but our forensic accounting team is still working through the records. The room tilted slightly. How long? I asked. 4 months, based on what we can see so far. It started with small amounts, $3,000–$4,000 at a time. Then it escalated. One of our major clients, a commercial real estate group out of Greensboro, called on Wednesday asking about a wire transfer they never authorized. That's what opened the door. 4 months. The same timeline as the secret credit card. The same timeline as the systematic withdrawals from our joint accounts. He'd been building a financial runway from 3 directions simultaneously. His clients, our marriage, and whatever Jessica was helping him access. Robert, I said, Trevor didn't just leave me. He emptied our accounts, removed personal property from our home, and brought his... I paused. He brought another employee into our house without my knowledge 2 weeks before he left. A long silence. Dear God, Robert said quietly. I have security footage. Another silence. Then, Martha, we've already contacted the State Financial Regulatory Board and the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I wanted you to hear this from me before it became public. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat very still for a moment, listening to the sound of a whole, intricate plan collapsing from the inside. Trevor had robbed 3 sources simultaneously: his clients, his wife, and his own future. He had been so focused on building an exit that he had built it on a foundation of fraud, and now every beam was giving way at once. I called Patricia. It's worse than we thought. It always is, she said. Tell me everything. He called me on a Friday. The number showed up on my screen, and I let it ring twice, 3 times, watching it, and then I answered. Martha. His voice had changed. 8 days ago, it had been confident enough to leave a handwritten note and disappear. Now it was tight and thin, the voice of a man who has realized too late, that the thing he was standing on was not solid ground. "Martha, I need your help. There's been a misunderstanding at the firm. They're saying I know what they're saying, Trevor." A silence. "I need a lawyer," he said. "A good one. If you could just—" "You want me," I said very clearly, "to pay for a lawyer. For you. After you emptied our accounts, took my grandmother's jewelry box, brought Jessica into my home, and left me a note. It's not, Martha, I can explain the money. It's complicated. And if you just— Trevor," I kept my voice even. "I have filed for divorce. I have reported the missing funds to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. I have provided security footage of you and Jessica entering my home without my consent to my attorney, who has forwarded it to the appropriate authorities. I have also spoken with Robert Williams." A very long pause. "You talked to Robert. He called me." I let that sit for a moment. I didn't need to call anyone. Everything found its way to me on its own. "Martha, the good news for you," I said, "is that you're going to have a great deal of time to find someone to explain your situation to." I'd start making calls. I hung up. My hands were steady. I was a little surprised by that. I had expected to feel something bigger in that moment, triumph or anger or some cinematic surge of satisfaction. Instead, I just felt quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a very long storm. Trevor was arrested on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after he left the note. The charges, as read by Assistant District Attorney Camille Okafor, 12 years prosecuting financial crimes, a conviction rate that had made the Charlotte Observer's business section twice, were extensive: embezzlement, wire fraud, unauthorized access to financial accounts, theft of personal property, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy, because Jessica Carver had been arrested the previous Thursday and had already begun cooperating with investigators in ways that were, according to Patricia, not going well for Trevor's defense. The total identified from Thornmere client accounts by the time of arrest: $312,000. From our joint accounts, $89,214. From the secret credit card in both our names, $14,180. The mahogany jewelry box, recovered from Jessica's apartment during the search, returned to me by Detective Marcus Chen of the CMPD Financial Crimes Unit on a Wednesday afternoon. He placed it on my desk with 2 hands and said, "I'm sorry it took this long." I opened it. The pearl earrings were gone. Jessica had apparently liked those. Everything else was there. My grandmother's gold watch, the small garnet brooch she wore to church, a handwritten note in Eleanor's handwriting that said only, "For Martha," from someone who always believed in her. I was not quiet then. That's the moment I finally cried. The arraignment was a Thursday morning in Mecklenburg County Courthouse. I wore a charcoal blazer. I arrived early because I wanted a seat where he would see me when they brought him in. He looked smaller than I remembered. That's the first thing I thought. The haircut that had always been precise was growing out unevenly. The suit was wrong. Not his usual, something that fit him like a costume. His eyes moved around the courtroom with the quick, scared motion of someone calculating exits. They found me. His eyes landed on mine and stopped. I looked at him steadily. Not with anger, not with triumph, just the calm, level gaze of a woman who has nothing left to prove to him. The judge, the Honorable Diane Westbrook, 21 years on the bench, set the trial date and denied the bail modification request Trevor's court-appointed lawyer made quietly and without much conviction. Jessica, having already accepted a plea arrangement through her attorney, was not present. As the officers led Trevor toward the side door, he looked at me one more time. I didn't look away. He did. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Patricia had made the argument cleanly and completely. Trevor had premeditated the financial extraction of our marriage over a minimum of 4 months, had used marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship, had conspired with an accomplice to remove personal property from the marital home, and had engaged in documented fraud against his employer during the same period. North Carolina courts have provisions for misconduct that affects equitable distribution. Patricia used every one of them. The settlement Patricia secured meant I retained 100% of our marital assets as restitution for what he had taken and spent. His lawyers tried to argue that I had been concealing assets, pointing to the Velmark inheritance and the trust as proof I'd hidden my real wealth. Patricia put my grandmother's will, the trust documents, the stock certificates, and the establishment dates on the table with the patience of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this argument. This inheritance was established before the marriage, held solely in my client's name and unknown to both parties during the marriage, she told the court. It is by definition not marital property. The defendant's attempt to characterize my client's inheritance as concealment reflects his own assumption that he was entitled to assets he never had any legal claim to. He got nothing, not a dollar, not a piece of furniture, not even his half of the security deposit on our first apartment, which I had quietly recovered from the escrow account the previous month. Trevor's trial lasted 11 days. He was convicted on all primary counts. The sentence: 7 years, North Carolina Department of Adult Correction. Jessica Carver received 3 years, suspended to 18 months with supervised probation, in exchange for her cooperation. Her family, according to the local coverage that ran in the Charlotte Observer under the byline of journalist Dana Park, had distanced themselves during the proceedings. Her professional reputation in Charlotte financial circles was, in Patricia's dry summary, comprehensively destroyed. The Thornmere clients received restitution from a combination of Trevor's seized assets and the firm's bonding insurance. Robert Williams sent me a handwritten note, not an email, a handwritten note, thanking me for my cooperation during the investigation. I appreciated the gesture. The mahogany jewelry box sits on my desk at Bright Hollow Labs now, in my corner office that looks looks out over the research floor. I can see my team through the glass wall, 63 people, soon to be 71, as we expand the Phase 3 division. The pearl earrings never came back. I replaced them with a pair my grandmother would have chosen herself. Simple gold, no fuss, built to last. 6 months after the arraignment, I stood in the new wing of Bright Hollow Labs and watched my research director, Dr. Ananya Krishnan, present preliminary data on the compound we'd been developing for 3 years. The numbers were good, better than good. There are approximately 4 million Americans living with the condition we're targeting, and if Phase 3 holds, we could meaningfully change the treatment landscape. My grandmother started her lab above a dry cleaners in Greensboro in 1961. I started mine in a rented office park in Ballantyne in 2012. Eleanor left me $23 million and a letter that I will keep for the rest of my life. But the truest thing she left me was this: the understanding that building something real, something that lasts, something that matters, requires knowing exactly who you are when no one is watching. It requires being the same person in the empty kitchen at 7:52 in the morning as you are on the research floor at 4 in the afternoon. It requires refusing to collapse when someone bets that you will. Trevor bet I would collapse. He lost that bet the same way he lost everything else, completely, and as a direct consequence of underestimating someone who had been quietly, steadily, unshowily building something he could never have imagined. He is in a correctional facility outside of Raleigh now. 7 years is a long time to think about what you've done. I have no feelings about his situation that I could accurately call vindictive. What I feel is something quieter than that, a kind of settled finality, the way a door sounds when it locks. The note he left me is in a folder in Patricia's office, filed as Exhibit A in the divorce proceedings. I don't need it anymore. I don't need the reminder. What he thought was a beginning, his new life with Jessica, his clean escape, his half of everything, was actually an ending. The ending of every lie he'd been telling himself about who he was and what he deserved. What he thought was my ending turned out to be mine. It was a beginning.